Hey, it's me, it's Phil. Before we go into this episode, I just want to give you a little bit of a warning. This is a family friendly show, and I do my best to make every single episode that way. But if you have very young kids, you might want to tell them to leave the room or get out of the car. Not if you're driving, don't do that. But what I'm saying is, you might want to skip this episode and listen to it yourself before you let your kids listen to it. And that's only because I'm going to go in depth a bit into the original inspirations for some of the Disney animated movies. And it might be a little scary for very young kids, or you might not want those things associated in the minds of your young kids. So there's your warning, but I hope you enjoyed the show.
From the Ear to There Travel Studio, this is the Ear to There Disney Podcast.
The Ear to There Podcast, it's time to start the show. Be sure to hold on tight, here we go. Exploring all the different Disney destinations. Ear to There, it's time to start the fun.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Ear to There Disney Podcast, Walt Disney World Word of the Week. I promise this will not be the word of the 6 weeks. I know I haven't done one of these in a while, but hold on to your wigs, hold on to your keys. I'm excited for this week's Walt Disney World Word of the Week, and it is brought to you by the letter L. L for legend. As I said at the start of the show, this is going to be all about the myths and the legends behind some of Disney's animated movies. As you probably know, I'm a big fan of podcasts. I listen to a bunch of other ones. There's this one called Myths and Legends. It's a great show, and it inspired me to do this episode. All right, so you probably already know that some of the Disney animated films are based on the Grimm fairy tales or some other kind of insane stories that were told hundreds of years ago, maybe to try to get kids to eat their vegetables or not talk to strangers or to listen to their parents. They all have these crazy backstories. So in this episode, I'm going to go into some of those backstories and show you or tell you, not show you because this isn't video. I mean, you know, you could be listening to this on YouTube in case and there is a video there, but it's not my face. All right, so you know what I mean. So let's go into some of those Disney animated films, myths and legends. Now, the first one I wanted to bring up is the often maligned Pocahontas. The reason why it's often maligned, well, it's just not. I'm sorry if you're a Pocahontas fan. I know, in my opinion, this is solely my opinion. It's just not a great animated movie. And to say they took some liberties with Pocahontas' story, at least what we historically know about it, is a bit of an exaggeration. They took liberties. They rewrote the whole darn story. You know the whole romance with John Smith in the movie? Did you know that didn't happen? Because that's fictionalized. Basically, the whole movie, and it's fine. You can have a fictional movie about a nonfiction character, a character from history, but Pocahontas takes it a bit far. Did you know she was 13 or 14 when she knew John Smith? Did you know he was late 20s, around 28 or 29? Did you know that they never had a romantic relationship in real life? Did you know that Pocahontas was kidnapped and died 4 years after that kidnapping? Oh, and she was held for ransom. So the story, Disney's story of Pocahontas, a bit different than Pocahontas' real life. She wasn't exactly singing to the trees, making friends with raccoons. All right, moving on to the next one. Let's talk a little bit about the Hunchback of Notre Dame. Is that how you say it? Notre Dame, Notre Dame? I don't know. People have been pronouncing that differently to me for years. Do you say it like the college? Are they the Fighting Irish? I don't know. Anyway, The Hunchback of Notre Dame was written by Victor Hugo, who also wrote Les Miserables. So you just knew going in that's going to be a laugh fest. I make myself laugh. Anyway, Disney took some liberties with this one too. And spoiler alert, if you haven't seen it or if your kids haven't seen this movie, But in the movie, Quasimodo falls in love with Esmeralda, the gypsy. Phoebus also falls in love with Esmeralda. Esmeralda falls in love with Phoebus. And Judge Frollo hates them all and wants to kill everybody. That's in the movie. And in the movie, he also kicks Quasimodo's mother in the head and murders her when Quasimodo's a baby. And this is how good of a guy Frollo is. He picks up Quasimodo, notices that he's not bread or food, and that it's actually a baby, and a baby with a disability on top of it. So he's about to throw Quasimodo in a well, and then he's stopped, and he's forced by the bishop? I think it's the bishop of Notre Dame to raise Quasimodo. Great job he does by raising him in the darn bell tower. Anyway, in the movie, Frollo and Quasimodo fight at the end. Frollo falls from the tower. Quasimodo lives. Happy ending. Esmeralda and Phoebus ride off into the sunset. Everybody's happy. But in the original Victor Hugo story, Esmeralda doesn't escape. She's caught by Frollo after Quasimodo inadvertently leads him and his crew of bad guys to her. She's caught, imprisoned, and then she's hung. She dies. And Quasimodo's so distraught in the original book that he holds on to Esmeralda for as long as he can. He holds onto her legs, he clings to her legs, and he ends up dying of starvation. Yes, that is how the book goes. I'm not recommending you read it. I'm just telling you that's the story behind the Hunchback film, which I think gets a bad rap. I actually like that movie a lot. I'm not reading a book now after I know this. I know a great joke about the Hunchback of Notre Dame. I'm going to tell it. Ready? Okay, here we go. And I might not tell this perfectly, but you'll get the gist of it. So in the joke, Quasimodo rings the bells of Notre Dame, but he rings them with his face, with his head. He slams them in to the bells to make the noises, to make them ring. Well, one day there's a tour group that comes up through Notre Dame, and they see him ringing the bells with his face, with his head, and it's an amazing thing. So one of the guys from the tour group is walking through the square later on when Quasimodo slips and falls from the tower into the square below. Of course, he doesn't survive in the joke, and people come running up to him to see if he's okay. Obviously, he's not. And the guy from the tour is walking by, and somebody says, "Oh my God, does anyone know this man?" And the guy from the tour says, "I don't know his name, but his face rings a bell." All right. I didn't make that up, but that's a horrible joke, but it's funny. Let's move on to one of our favorite Disney animated films, The Little Mermaid. This story, The Little Mermaid, was originally written in 1836 by Hans Christian Andersen, the same guy who wrote a lot of children's stories. I guess they're called children's stories, including the Snow Queen or Frozen. By the way, did you know that Hans, Kristoff, Anna, and Sven, the names of those characters, are a tribute to the original writer of Frozen or the Snow Queen, Hans Christian Andersen? Get it? Hans, Kristoff, Anna, Sven. Get it? All right. That's true. See, you learned new things. Okay. I'll go on. So, The Little Mermaid, the story is kind of the same, but her deal with Ursula, or as she's known in the original story, the witch or the sea witch, was a little more extreme than it was in a movie. In a movie, she only lost her voice. But in the original story, she not only didn't have her voice to be talkative to the prince, the sea witch amped it up a little bit and made her legs very, very painful to walk on. I don't know why she did that. I guess because they were new. I'm not quite sure why. But her legs were extremely hard to walk on and difficult and painful. She had no voice, and the deal was if the prince didn't marry her, which he doesn't in the original story, she would then die and be turned into sea foam. Yes, sea foam. The witch Ursula, or the sea witch, was straight up a little nastier in the original story. All right, let's move on and talk about Pinocchio. Of course, in the Disney animated movie, Pinocchio, early on in his first few minutes of life, gets a conscience. He gets a cricket named Jiminy Cricket as his conscience. And in the movie, Pinocchio is guided, although he doesn't really listen to him too much, but he's guided by Jiminy Cricket pretty much the entire time. Well, not in the original book. In the book, actually, the cricket, not named Jiminy in the book, is mostly a ghost throughout the book. Why is he mostly a ghost? Well, because Pinocchio throws a hammer at him and kills him. Yes, that's what happens. In the original book from 1882, it says this: "At these last words, Pinocchio jumped up in a fury, took a hammer from the bench, and threw it with all his strength at the talking cricket. Perhaps he did not think it would strike it, but sad to relate, my dear children, he did hit the cricket straight on its head. With a last weak crit, 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 the poor cricket fell from the wall, dead." Yes, that's what happens in the original book. He kills Jiminy Cricket. Not only that, later on, Pinocchio's not really, he doesn't really learn his lesson in the book. Later on in the book, he is cold and wet and he lays next to a fire. Remember, he's a wooden puppet and his feet are close to the fire. They catch fire and burn off. You can't make this up. There's more stuff in this that's even more disturbing that I can't go into because, like I said at the beginning of the show, it's a family show. But man, do a little research on the original Pinocchio story for yourself. You won't believe it. How about this one? Going to Cinderella. And we all have heard like weird, freaky, scary things about the original Cinderella story. The Brothers Grimm originally wrote the first Cinderella. And at the end of the original story, the stepsisters really wanted their feet to fit into that glass slipper. They wanted their feet to fit so badly that they cut off pieces of their feet to fit into the slipper. Listen, I don't care how big somebody's house is. They could have a castle. They could have a ballroom. They could have, I don't even know what. I am not cutting off a piece of my foot to fit into a shoe. I need to walk. Anyway, that is disturbing. But it is less disturbing than the story about Sleeping Beauty. You know what? I can't even go into the original story of Sleeping Beauty on this podcast. I can't do it. It's that bad. So you should read that on your own time at some point. But just know there are acts of all kinds of craziness in the original Sleeping Beauty story. Okay, let's talk about Peter Pan. Okay? Peter Pan, the original Disney animated film, the animated version has had its fair share of controversies over the years, with its depiction of Native Americans, which, by the way, was pretty common in the 50s when it came out, but now is not common, and it's pretty glaring that couldn't be made today. But I've watched Peter Pan recently with my kids, and Peter Pan isn't nice. Like, throughout the whole movie, my kids kept looking at me like rolling their eyes like that. He's not a nice boy, and he's not. But in the original, I know it's really funny that I'm sitting here as a 41-year-old man talking about Peter Pan's a fictional boy's behavior in a fictional film. But in the original book, J.M. Barrie, the author of Peter Pan, talks about how Peter Pan would kick kids out of Neverland. Yes, homeless, orphan children. He would kick them out of Neverland if they got too old. So it didn't matter if they didn't have any family to go to, or no parents, or no friends. They lived in Neverland for 15 years. Guess what? You're not a kid anymore. You're out. Not to mention that he also fed Captain Hook's hand to a crocodile. That happens. You don't see it in the movie, but you know it happened. So, I mean, Peter Pan wasn't and isn't the best role model for modern day children. And listen, I say this all kind of with a grain of salt. I love all of these movies, but it's really funny to go back and think and look at the original stories. Like Tangled. The original story of Rapunzel is way messed up. Now, you already know the movie Tangled. You know how it goes with Flynn Rider and Mother Gothel and all that. So let me quickly summarize the original Rapunzel story by the Brothers Grimm. So in the original story, there is a man and a woman living next door to a sorceress or a witch or Mother Gothel. They call her Dame Gothel in the book. But they live next door to her, which already, I think, is a problem. Talk about a bad neighbor. And the lady is pregnant. So she starts having cravings. And her husband goes next door to, you guessed it, Mother Dame Gothel's garden and gets Rapunzel. Not the person. It is apparently, upon a little bit of research, it is a leafy salad green, is what Rapunzel is. So she eats Rapunzel. And it's really, really, really good. So, of course, a pregnant lady, what does she do? Late one night, she tells her husband, hey, go back out to the store. I'm pregnant. You have to go. Go to Wawa, get me some more Rapunzel. So he goes next door where he's not supposed to be and gets more Rapunzel. Well, the sorceress, Dame Gothel, sees him. She catches him and she's going to kill him. Well, he's like, whoa, 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 you can't. Like, my wife is pregnant. We're going to have this baby. And Dame Gothel says, all right, well, here's what I'm going to do. I'll give you mercy. I'll grant you mercy if you give me your baby when your baby is born. So for some reason, the dad, the husband, is like, all right, yeah, that sounds okay. So he gets the wife to give Dame Gothel, the sorceress, Rapunzel, the baby. She actually doesn't have the name yet. So Dame Gothel takes the baby to raise her own, names of Rapunzel, and it turns out she's the most beautiful baby in the world. So since she's the most beautiful baby, then the most beautiful little girl in the world, what does Dame Gothel do? She, of course, locks her up in a tower. And the only way she can access that tower is by letting her hair grow super long and by yelling from the bottom of the tower, Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair that I may climb thy golden stair. So she's the only one that knows that Rapunzel's up there. One day, Rapunzel, who not only is beautiful, but has an incredible singing voice, Mandy Moore, there's a prince riding by on his horse. He hears her singing, climbs the tower. They fall in love. He keeps coming back night after night, eventually asking Rapunzel to marry him. She agrees. They get married, and they decide, hey, listen, we're going to break you out of here. So he keeps coming back every night. They have this plan to escape, to get Rapunzel out of there. Oh, wait, I forgot to mention, she's pregnant at this point with twins. Mother Gothel finds out about it, cuts off Rapunzel's hair, kicks her out of the tower to the ground, and she's left to wander the wilderness by herself, pregnant with 2 kids. Then later that night, the prince comes back. He yells for Rapunzel to let down her hair. The hair comes down, but at the other end of it isn't Rapunzel. It's Dame Gothel with the hair that she cut off Rapunzel, and she pushes the prince out of the tower. He falls not to his death, but into a thorn bush. The thorn bush scratches his eyeballs and he's blind. Yes, that's what happens in Rapunzel. So glad they changed the story in Tangled. Actually, it ends up having a pretty positive ending. They both roam the woods and the wilderness for years, eventually finding each other. The prince finds out he has 2 children. They embrace, they hug. Rapunzel's tears fall into the prince's eyes. His sight comes back, and they live happily ever after. So it has a pretty good ending. But imagine if you took your kids to see that movie. You'd have some questions to answer on a car ride home. All right, how about this? I want to do 2 more. Let's talk about Beauty and the Beast. In the original story, Beauty and the Beast, that was written in 1740. Now, I'm going to say her name, and I'm going to butcher it, but I'm going to tell you who wrote it anyway. She was a French novelist named Gabrielle Suzanne Barbeau de Villeneuve. That might be okay. That might work. All right, anyway, I thought that'd be a lot worse than it was. So in the original story, the prince's father dies when he's super young. His mother has to wage war to save their kingdom. So she leaves the young prince with, you guessed it, an evil fairy. And when the prince turns of age, the evil fairy decides, well, for lack of better words, that she and the prince should be together as a couple. He says, no, he's like, whoa, no way, you're my babysitter. So she gets so mad that she turns him into a beast. So it's a little different than the Disney version that they put out there. Of course, the curse works the same way, that only true love will turn him back to his original form. And the original story does actually have a happy ending because Beauty finds him, they're married, and they live happily ever after. Now, switching over to the last one, this is the last one I want to talk about. One of the most horrifying of the original stories is the fairy tale Little Snow White. Now, this is another Grimm Brothers fairy tale, and it kind of goes like the movie to start. Snow White's father marries this evil queen. She talks to the magic mirror. The magic mirror says Snow White's the fairest one in the land. So in the book, the huntsman takes her out on the queen's orders to kill her. He can't do it, of course. He lets her go. She meets up with the 7 dwarfs. And eventually the queen shows up with the apple. Snow White bites the apple, falls into a death sleep. Now in the movie, here's, of course you've seen it, is where the prince finds her in a glass coffin, kisses her, she wakes up, and they live happily ever after. But in the original story, that's not really how it works. And actually, in the original story, he doesn't kiss her at all. He finds her in the woods in a glass coffin, decides he needs to move her to a more permanent resting place. And while his servants are moving her to that more permanent place, one of them trips and falls, causing the piece of apple to pop out of Snow White's mouth. She wakes up, they get together, they love each other, they decide to get married. I guess that was a little much for the Disney animated version and a little too much for moviegoers in 1937. You know what else was too much for them? Guess how this originally ended. The queen shows up at the wedding of the prince, not knowing that he's getting married to Snow White, sees Snow White at the wedding and tries to kill her again at her own wedding. So what does the prince do? You would be like, he's going to lock the queen up and throw away the key. No. You know what the prince does in his story? He orders his servants to place red hot iron slippers on the queen, and he makes her dance until her death in red hot iron slippers. Just so you know, don't look for those at the store or on Amazon. You're not going to find them. Yeah, just a little bit different than the original story, just like the rest of the ones I talked about on this episode. Look, I'm up over 22 minutes. I got to wrap it up. Thanks so much for listening. And that is going to do it for this week's episode of the Ear to There Disney podcast, Walt Disney World Word of the Week. I really hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope it was fun for you to listen to. It was a lot of fun to make and to talk about. And it's crazy to go into these a little bit and find out the legends and the myths behind Disney's animated films. It was a lot of fun. So I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, do me a favor, tell someone about this episode. Maybe you know someone who would really enjoy it, really have fun with it. So please share this with them and hopefully they will enjoy it too. All right. Thank you again so much for listening. Remember, there will be a new episode of the Word of the Week next week, as well as a new episode of the Ear to There Disney podcast. So until next time, you were awesome. I really appreciate you taking the time to listen to this. Thanks again. Bye-bye.
Ear to there, ear to there.